ICQ Podcast episode 361, High Power Battery Box. Well, hello fellow amateur and radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 361st episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported this episode by our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0MNG is joined by Dan KB6 Uniform, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, and Ruth KM4 Lima Alpha Oscar to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode we feature high-powered battery boxes. Now, as always, it's the very kind donations of our subscription, the monthly and annual subscription donors that help pay our way and keep us effort free on the internet. We would like you to consider, if you get value from this show today, but to visit icqpodcast.com/donate, look at some of the options there, put into monetary terms the value you got from the show, and say help us out and pay our costs on the internet and help us publish the show. So anything you can send our way is greatly appreciated, and you can join those monthly and subscription donors in helping us out, with the show, and continue to provide this show advert free to you every fortnight. We're talking about said show and finding the value from it. We're going to join Martin, Dan, Edmund, Ed and Ruth to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur ham radio news, including Radio France Splatter Untenable, and is ham radio coming to Amazon? As always, hope you enjoy.
Hi guys, this is Martin from the ICQ podcast, M1MRB or W9ICQ, depending on which side of the pond you are. I just wanted to remind you and re-invite you that on the 16th of October at 2000 local UK time or 1900 UTC, the ICQ podcast is intending to have its first hub meeting where we're going to meet up on our digital talk group and have just a general chit-chat. You're all welcome. And if you don't have a digital radio and just want to listen, you can obviously check out the Brandmeister hose line, which is on one of our web pages, how to do that. And also, if you don't have a digital radio or one of the digital modes that we use, which is DMR, Yaesu Fusion, D-Star and NXDN, you can still join us by using a mobile phone app. So we'd love to have you aboard and look forward to you joining us. And bearing in mind, this shouldn't be a one-way discussion. We were just as interested in hearing what you've been up to as you asking us what we've been up to. So hopefully we'll all be together on the 16th. 73. Well, hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ podcast, episode 361, and tonight's News Roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Good evening, Martin.
Yeah, good evening, Dan. Good to have you with us. Mr. Edmund Spicer's with us, M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, mate. Good to have you with us. Moving over to Germany, we have Mr. Ed Durrant, D5LP. Hi, Ed.
Evening, all.
Yeah, I still like your Dixon Green impersonation, but yeah, that's good. And the boys all got Leslie last time. They were all doing an impersonation of Leslie, and Leslie didn't get it, which is a real shame. But last but not least, back from a little bit of a layoff, but congratulations to her as well. We have Ruth KM4LAO. Hi, Ruth.
Hello, it's great to be back.
Yeah, good to have you. And you were saying earlier that you've got a little bit of time now, so you can spend some time with us, which is good. So that's great. Right, let's start our news stories. The IARU Region 1 monitoring system said that Radio France International was splattering. Now, you know, everybody has to be careful, not just us amateurs. Edmund, you speak French. You were surprised at this one.
I do speak French, but I don't tend to listen to RFI, Radio France International, on shortwave, mainly because from here on the south coast of England, I tend to listen to RTL on 234 kilohertz long wave and to FM broadcasts from France when conditions are good over the channel. But I was rather surprised to hear that this was going on, because in Europe, the 40-meter amateur band stops at 7,200 kilohertz, and from there up to 7,550 from memory is the 41-meter broadcast band with amplitude modulation, AM broadcast stations. And RFI is on 7,205 from the Issoudun transmitter, which is more or less slap bang in the middle of France. And that facility is operated by TDF, Télédiffusion Française, which has been around since, in its current form, since about the mid-1970s, I think. So this is a well-resourced organisation with a good track record, expensive, high-quality equipment, not the kind of thing that you would expect to malfunction or be splattering down nearly 20 kilohertz. Yes, okay, amplitude modulation is wide relative to SSB, but if your carrier frequency is on 7205, you shouldn't be going all the way down to 7185, more or less. So the moral of that story, I guess, is that even the most expensive, well-maintained equipment can malfunction occasionally. So if you operate equipment of that spec, you need to keep an eye on it to see what it's doing, and not just assume that you don't need to because of its pedigree, shall we say. So the IARU mentioned about that. I haven't heard this splattering personally. I would hope by now it has long since been fixed, but I can't vouch for that one way or the other. Other than that, it mentions about a couple of other broadcast stations which are in the amateur 40-meter band. The Voice of the Broad Masses from Eritrea on 7120, I have heard on occasions, not strongly admittedly, but strong enough to make that part of the band unusable. And there's all the usual over-the-horizon radar suspects as well. The only saving grace here, I suppose, is that all of these intruders don't tend to stick around for very long. For example, RFI in English is only on the air for 1 hour, and the over-the-horizon radars, if they do rock up on a frequency, they don't tend to stay there more than several tens of minutes or a couple of hours. It's very unusual for an over-the-horizon radar to be on a frequency 24 hours a day for several days in a row, for example. So not too much of a problem, but as ever, I support what the IARU monitoring team do, and all power to their elbow. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, that's interesting, Edmund. Well, you say they don't stay on a frequency for long. Well, look what happened to Chernobyl when the woodpecker had the problems, or the woodpecker had problems because Chernobyl went down. Horrible. But in fairness, yeah, there are other stations. It could be a fault on the transmission, or it might just be, we don't know, that somebody is not getting the training they used to have years ago. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, that's what I would possibly suspect, is they're just, I don't know, slipping a little bit on their quality control. I got a couple of other comments, though. First off, I want to commend the IARU Region 1 monitoring system. I think that they do a really good job. I think they do a better job than IARU Region 2. And secondly, I had a similar situation here. I'm a big 30-meter fan. And about a week or so ago, I heard AM station on 10.1 megahertz, which, because they're AM, they overlapped into the ham band. And I couldn't really make it out very well. And so I asked on Twitter, and some guy said, well, it's probably the second harmonic of WWRB on 5.05 megahertz. I reported it to the ARRL Volunteer Monitoring Service. I don't know what they'll be able to do about it, but I heard them again a couple of days ago and reported it again. So I guess what I'm saying here is if you do hear something like that, figure out who to report it to and report it in, because, if we don't report it, then no action could ever get taken.
Yeah, you're dead right. And, it is about not causing interference. We're not supposed to cause interference. And I must admit, I came across a couple of amateurs on Monday night that were rag chewing on upper sideband on 2 meters, upper sideband down at 144.1, 144.01 megahertz. Right in the Morse end of the band. And I thought, guys, and I did mention to them, they never took any notice, and they were actually using call signs. I apologise to anybody outside the UK. They were British amateurs. From the call signs they were using, they could have been pirates and just picked a couple of poor call signs, but it was wrong. Ruth, what's your thoughts?
This is a pretty interesting one. I mean, Edmund and Dan have definitely covered a lot of the aspects quite well already. Like, from my perspective, yeah, broadcast stations are super interesting, but it's definitely unfortunate to hear how much this one was splattering around. I was kind of wondering what the protocol was for reporting this, so it makes sense that there's probably some sort of reporting system in Region 1 to get that on the record, so hopefully it can be cleared up.
Yeah, certainly is. Okay then, well, Ed, you're in Europe, on mainland Europe. What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, do you remember, Martin, back when we took our exam, interference wasn't called EMI, electromagnetic interference. It was called RFI, radio frequency interference. And look what this is. It's RFI again. Okay, you can call them Radio France International or just radio frequency interference. Either way, whoever allocated an AM broadcast station a center frequency of 7205 kilohertz is probably more to blame for this problem than RFI themselves. Yes, they shouldn't splatter right down to 7184 or whatever it was, but even with the cleanest of AM broadcast transmitters, the lower sideband on there is going to be more than 5 kilohertz wide, so they're going to be in the AM band. There is no way they should have been allocated that frequency to transmit on in the first place. So, yeah, they are an AM station, not an upper sideband station. So, that's my thoughts on it. I think really it's a matter of the regulators as well in France or whoever allocated them that frequency, that have to shoulder part of the blame as well. And yeah, let's hope it's been fixed by now. As you say, if they're only on for 1 hour, that's maybe why it's taken a little while to get reported. And as for the other stations that blatantly just use frequencies they haven't been allocated in some of the African countries and Radio China and so on, they remain a problem. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, they certainly do. And, in fairness, this could have been a fault. It could have been an education problem with an engineer. It could have been somebody putting a typo on a license. But whatever, if it was a typo on a license or an engineering thing, then you would expect the engineer to at least know that it was wrong. And yeah, if with cutbacks, so many cutbacks are happening, if it was a fault on a transmitter, then it's hardly surprising that these things happen if they don't have full-time engineers these days. Anyway, that's at least it's been monitored at the moment by the powers that be. Moving to our next news story, and I hijacked this straight off of Dan's website, so I'm going to let Dan go first on this. Amazon have been experimenting with amateur radio. So, Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure, I'll just explain what's going on here. So Amazon has published a blog post, and you can find a link to that right on my website. And what they've done is they've set up a couple of Arden nodes as an experiment, and how should I say this? So what they're doing is they're experimenting with this as a simulated emergency communication kind of situation. And what they're doing is they're taking images at this remote location and using some Amazon hardware called I think it's called the Amazon Snow Edge or something like that, and transmitting that back to an Amazon facility where they're connecting with Amazon Web Services, and they're using a service called Recognition to do image processing and figure out what's in the image, what kind of objects are in the image. And I thought that was all pretty interesting. Now, of course, they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart, because they say right in the blog post, they offer nonprofits a discount for this service. So I didn't price out the service, or the hardware even, but it would be interesting to find out if it's at all reasonable for, say, an Aries group to try this, or to do it without Amazon hardware and software. That would be the sort of the interesting thing to do. Try and come up with, say, an open source solution for this. But that's what they're trying to do, and it certainly is an interesting concept.
Yeah, well, I know there's quite a lot of amateurs work for Amazon, because I know somebody who works at Amazon, and he tells me that they have an Amazon amateur radio group within the company. My only concerns, Dan, is if they are testing amateur radio and using their ham radio operators, is probably fine to test this stuff. But if I was company ABCXYZ and I wanted to do it, surely amateur radio is of a non-commercial nature, or it certainly is in the UK. So there'd be no way I could use this without getting an amateur radio license.
Well, right. So I don't think they're suggesting that companies should try this, in case power goes out or whatever. What they're really doing is pushing their services for nonprofits to use in non-pecuniary applications. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting one, I must admit. Ruth, what's your thoughts on this one?
I agree. It's a very interesting story. I learned some stuff too, because I haven't been heavily involved in the emergency side of things or done anything with these types of nodes before. So I had fun doing some reading on just the different components of the system before the recording. It's a pretty interesting story, and I'm curious to see more about how Amazon blends like ham radio and their hardware software, or if they publish any follow-up blogs with more information or whatnot. But there's definitely the same concern, how does this translate when they're not just testing? Like, where do they go from here with it? So I'm curious to see what follows.
Yeah, as I say, there's lots of things that, somebody has to innovate and try. And I know in the past we've talked about Bitcoins being sent over amateur radio, and that got into trouble. Now, I'm sure the guys weren't trying to make money by sending Bitcoins over amateur radio, and this might be a similar thing. Let's try it out. A group of amateurs possibly are trying something out, and hopefully it'll be interesting. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Okay, well, what I understand from what's written there and what Dan's expanded on is that, well, first of all, for the listeners, in case there are a few that don't know what the Arden network is, it's the amateur radio run TCP/IP-based network running over RF on 2.4, 2.3, 2.4 gig or 5 gigahertz, or 5.6, is it? Whatever the amateur band is anyway, as a backup to all the other infrastructure, and it's generally there for use during emergencies. Obviously, it's tested beforehand, but we're talking about an emergency situation where the amateur radio service is actually providing perhaps to the fire brigade for a bushfire or to some other emergency service for flooding. This service of giving them effectively intranet, so inter their own organisation networking the same as they're used to, but using amateur radio because the cables are out, the cell systems are out, etc. And the pictures taken, for instance, maybe a picture is taken of a bushfire or a wildfire or some part of the disaster. And this is where Amazon are now coming into it. They're saying we can link into this and we'll do the analysis of those pictures and tell you what you need to know. And that's their Snowball Edge recognition system. So I think there's a clear demarcation here between where it's amateur radio and where it's Amazon. And Amazon are talking about providing a service on the back end for the council and government emergency services to receive that data, albeit via Arden, but then to provide the information back to the authorities of maybe some guidance as to where they need to attack the fire, if it's a fire, or whatever's relevant there for the emergency. So the amateur radio involvement would be the same as if they are providing that pseudo internet, if you like, in an emergency to the emergency services. And I don't think that would be considered as commercial work. The back end is the commercial part, and that's no amateurs involved, as I understand it.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. Edmund, you got any thoughts on this one?
Nothing to add beyond what's been covered already, Martin.
Oh, well, sorry we left you out in the cold a little bit on that one, but as I say, it was an interesting story, and I think that's a good one. Moving to our next news story, it was announced on the RSGB website this week that foundation practical assessments will no longer be required with immediate effect. Now, they haven't been required during lockdown when we were doing courses online. People were doing courses and exams online. In some ways, I think it's a bit of a shame. But Edmund, you go first on this one.
Well, I appreciate this is the Luddite, unpopular minority opinion here, but this doesn't sit easily with me somehow. If you go on social media, Facebook groups, I would say roughly 2/3 of the comments suggest that it's a good thing and 1/3 suggests it's not a good thing. Well, I'm very much in the 1/3 not a good thing camp on this one. The foundation license should do what it says on the tin, give you a foundation, and it just doesn't seem right to me somehow that you can do the foundation course, learn the theory, pass the exam, get your license to transmit 10 watts, and okay, that's not mega power in the grand scheme of things, but it's not 100 milliwatts either. It's if you don't know what you're doing with it, you could theoretically burn yourself or cause interference, and you could do all of that and get the license without ever having touched a radio. And I possibly can't really articulate why that doesn't sit easily with me, but it just really doesn't. And yes, I know you could say, well, you pass the exam and then you go to the club and you have your first QSO there and under the wings of the club or a local amateur, or you go on YouTube and watch an instructional video, which hopefully will tell you things that are correct, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well, and if you're a beginner then you're not necessarily equipped to discern the difference between the two. And yes, it's true that you can do all of that, but doing that outside of the training, it just doesn't feel right somehow. I possibly can't articulate very well how or why, but I can say with certainty that if I had not had the 2 QSOs as part of my foundation training, when I came to make my first QSO completely on my own, in my own right, as an M6, as it was at the time in 2009, I would not have had the confidence or the self-confidence anywhere near to the same extent to go on the air and do it. And it was nerve-wracking enough then, having had the experience of part of the training. So for what my own personal experience is worth, I certainly benefited from having it in the training and taking actual operating out of it, setting up a station, knowing to plug what into what. It just somehow doesn't sit right with me. Martin, back to you.
You guys know that I've trained people in the UK, and yeah, I think that one of the things, the 3-tier license system and the foundation and intermediate license with practicals, I honestly believe was a great thing. However, if I look at it when I took mine and Ed took his, because we took the same, well, very similar exams anyway, a few years apart, we didn't do practicals. In fact, in fairness, I went straight to, I could have run 400 watts on 2 meters, having never, ever, ever operated a radio. Now, for those of you who want to spit feathers, yeah, I did a bit of CB before I became an amateur. So that helped just a little bit, but in fairness, my argument has always been, if you learn to drive a car, you drive under supervision. If you learn to fly a plane, you fly under supervision to start with. Yeah, if you do amateur radio, you weren't even allowed to do anything more than pass a greetings message. So, bit strange. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, just touching on the last point you made there, Martin. You're right. When we took the exam, there was no practical required. But I know certainly in my case, before I could take the exam, which was the equivalent of the full license exam in all the different countries these days, as in there was only one exam to take, you actually had to do a course, and that was usually at the local radio club. And that course, if I'm not wrong, took about 6 months, 5 or 6 months to complete all the subject matter and get ready to take the exam. And in that time, you were also involved in activities in the radio club. So you may not have actually operated on your own. You may have sat by somebody who was operating. So you saw what was going on, you heard it, you knew it. You were probably a shortwave listener, so you listened in that way. You did construction. You did all the, if you like, a lot of the practical stuff anyway, as being a member of the radio club. I realise that doesn't happen these days. Clubs are not the same as they were in our day. But in any case, I think the clubs and hubs and groups do need to step up to keep this kind of practical training available for people who do pass their exam, or in fact even still keep it as almost an optional part of their training courses. Now, obviously, if you're training online and you're taking the exam online because perhaps you live in the north of Scotland, where there are no clubs close by, or wherever remote, or you don't have the time to get to a club, you're going to miss out on this, which is a real shame. But I'll come back to another point on this as well, which is the regulator doesn't necessarily say you have to do this practical test. They simply want to know that you know, through answering the questions correctly, safety and regulations. And that's what the license is about. Anything on top of that is extra qualification for you. But even then, the amateur radio license is not a qualification like a university degree or an IEEE course or anything in that way. So a lot of this is what is required for the regulator, and then what do people ideally need to know about, and do we have the right to say that? I think that's a question as to, how do you set the exam? I would not like to be in the group at the RSGB who set the exam questions, because, really it's, What do you put in? What don't you put in? How do you avoid being an elitist hobby by making the exam too hard in some way, perhaps? In any case, I'm also looking at other countries, and I can only think of 2 countries, as far as I know, and there may be a couple more, but there's not a lot of countries that have practical exams or have had practical exams. I can think of the UK and Australia, that's all. And as the Australian system's based or copied from the UK system to a certain extent, that's not surprising that they also have the practicals there. But let's pass it over to some of our colleagues in the US. I don't believe there's a practical component in any of the US licenses, and they have more amateurs than most countries. And I can't think, as I said, I can't think of any other countries who need the practical, that the regulator needs the practical to be passed before they can issue a license. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Ed. The states don't require you to do practicals, because it was 10 years ago I did do my license, and I renewed it, Dan, so you're all right. They ain't going to come around, knock on your door and say, where's this person who hasn't renewed his license? So, yeah. But let's pass it over to Ruth before we go to Dan. Ruth, there is an age difference, and I'm being very polite about this. We're all old boys. What do you think about, should there be practicals for people when they're learning, or do you think people can just learn it as an academic?
Personally, I definitely think there should be practicals. I mean, that's the whole reason I went to Kettering, was because I got the co-op practical experience that really tied in well with my undergrad. But even just for something like something technical like a ham radio license, I think it's being able to have practical assessments as you're learning the material is huge. So I think it's pretty unfortunate that the requirement for this has been removed. I'd always kind of thought the foundation license was super cool, even maybe a little more than the US, because they had all that practical knowledge that you have the assessments for, along with the technical head knowledge. And that pure hands-on experience with someone else while you're learning about the hobby is huge to help people stay interested. I definitely can't understand why they removed it, especially with the challenges getting people licensed during COVID and whatnot. And hopefully, as the RSGB encourages, and as all the best clubs that I've been in have been doing, that clubs will be able to implement, the good practical training themselves to get people learning stuff and involved in the club. But overall, I tend to think this may cause more harm than good in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Dan, you teach like I do. You don't have to teach practicals. I no longer have to do it, but I might carry on if we do foundation courses. What would you think it would be an advantage to teach youngsters?
Well, so I think it's a shame that they're removing it, but of course I can understand why. It takes time, and I suppose like the regular test, you could do just a bare amount and pass the practical and still not end up knowing as much as maybe you should. But the real work in getting somebody to be, and I'll use this term knowing it's the wrong term, getting someone to be a real ham is getting them to do things more than once. You got to do it over and over and over. And for that, you got to, as somebody who is a mentor to a new ham, you got to sort of be in there for the long run, right? And so, it is a shame, but I can see why it's being removed. I guess that just sums it up.
Well, as I say, at the end of the day, it's not a legal requirement in the UK, therefore we can drop it. However, I still think that if somebody's going to teach it as a club, it certainly breaks up the lectures. It gets people from sitting in front of a desk for hours on end listening to presentations. It breaks it up, lets them get up, walk around, have a go, and gets them the excitement of amateur radio. So that for me is one thing. And if clubs don't want to do it in the teach, then maybe they should just do it as invite people along for a day and go through a number of practicals, like a self-help, get people getting started type morning or afternoon.
Well, for sure. So there's plenty of other exercises that they can do. How to program a radio, how to build a 450 ohm ladder line J pole. There's just a number of these things that you can do after they get the light.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there, Dan, but got most of it. Right, let's move to our next news story. Amateur radio volunteers assist in a major US cycling event. That's the other side of the pond. So I'm going to probably make Ruth a little bit worried and ask her, because she said this looked interesting. But this is the sort of thing that very few people can actually cover the comms on a 203-mile course. This is suited to amateur radio and people in the emergency groups testing out their software and hardware, isn't it, Ruth?
Oh, absolutely. Since I'm not involved in cycling, I didn't know this event was so big, but I really enjoyed reading about it and seeing how the amateur radio operators were able to, come together from a bunch of different states, I believe, and be able to provide support for this really long event. It was really cool just to read about it and learn some new stuff about how it all worked. I personally like that they had APRS trackers on all of the cyclists. With how much fun I've had tracking high altitude balloons in the past, it's just so much fun to see where things are in real time. I think it's really great that with the trackers on all the cyclists, family, or just anyone interested in the race can watch in real time and see where people are on the course. So I thought it was a great event, and I'm glad that so many hams were able to be of assistance.
Yeah, certainly. And say APRS is a good thing. Doesn't always work so well in the UK these days because there doesn't seem to be many digipeaters around. I did run APRS for a while when I fit the radio into the car and didn't have the microphone connected. And on my trip to work, 25 miles, I think I only went past about 2 digipeaters, and they were fairly local. But yeah, it's a good concept. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, this is a for amateur radio. As you say, there's not a whole lot of other technologies, at least affordable technologies that they could use to do this. And hams are just set up to do that. We do a similar event here in Ann Arbor every summer. The longest route is only 100 miles, so we're covering a lot smaller area. But we do very much the same thing. We have APRS in our vehicles. Sometimes some of us do, and it works out great. We do a pretty good job, I think.
Yeah, so it does prove that these things are good. Edmund, you got any thoughts on this one?
Well, on the subject of APRS, down here on the south coast, we do seem to have quite a few receive-only iGates. So if you transmit on 144.800, you may be received and your position uploaded to the internet. But because it's receive-only and not transmitting, you won't have a signal coming back to you from the same iGate to your radio to tell you that you've been received. Just that I mentioned that. So 200 miles, well, from here on the south coast, I drove almost 200 miles to go on holiday at the end of September, and I found myself in Nottingham. And I think Nottingham is taken to be more or less the dead centre of England. So that shows you how far it is if it's in more or less a straight line. So I'm seriously impressed with the chap who's responsible for organising all of this, because with the amount of people and the amount of technology and the amount of resources involved, I don't think volunteering to be an overall charge of all of that is something that I would dare to do, frankly. So serious respect to that person. And it's really intriguing how it's done, because my immediate thought when I heard of the distance of the route, plus the fact that there are mountains along the way, my first thought was, are they using near vertical incident skywave and low horizontal HF antennas down around about 5 megahertz or something like that? But it turned out they're not. They're using a couple of mobile repeater units on top of mountains, which is very, very cool. And as a VHF, UHF enthusiast, I do approve of that kind of thing, of course. And as Ruth has said, the inclusion of the APRS is really, really nice as well. So, yeah, it's a good story, and it's something that amateur radio can do in a way that other forms of technology or commercial organisations probably couldn't do it, Martin.
Yeah, I'd say it's a nice story. Ed, last words on this one?
Yeah, I must say that, 200 miles is quite a way, but in principle, what they're doing is very similar to what the club that I'm a member of in Australia do. That's the Central Coast Amateur Radio Club. Shout out to those guys. Each year, they do 1 or 2 horse trial events that horses are going cross-country in areas where there is no cell coverage and any other kind of communication is very expensive to put in place commercially for these runs. So they rely totally on amateur radio. And the Wyson organisation that is partnered with the radio club, so that's actually the Wireless Institute of Australia's Civil Emergency Network. And indeed, we put up, or they put up, and when I was with them, we put up portable repeaters as well. They've been doing this for the last, I think, almost 25 years now, supporting these events. So what we're seeing here is nothing new. This event in the US is perhaps a bit larger scale because there's multiple clubs involved. And I think it was Edmund said, the organisation behind it is actually the thing to worry about here, not the technology. It's organising the people, it's organising things to be the right place. And that really is a challenge, and they're doing very well. APRS, from what I read in our text here, and I might be wrong, I believe the APRS are only in the ham vehicles, not every single cyclist. But even with that, you know where your checkpoints are. If the people have to go out from the checkpoints to find a missing cyclist, they'll go out with perhaps a medical officer or whatever, and hence you can see where the people are on a large map. So, the use of APRS is very useful. Yep, that's about it. I mean, it's great. It's one area where the amateur radio service can do something that, for commercial reasons, there is no alternative. And without the safety of the amateur radio people there, they couldn't run these sporting events.
Very true. And nicely, it's another nice story that amateur radio are involved with the community in assisting. All right, it's not emergency, but we're still assisting the community. So a nice story. Moving on to our last news story. And this weekend is going to be an absolute nightmare of a busy weekend. The 16th and 17th of October, 2021. Not only have we got Jota, which is Jamboree on the Air with the Scouts, and you've also got Exercise Blue Ham, and I'm sure Ed will tell you, and I'll tell you later, there's an ICQ event on that day. But Edmund, you go first, because I know you like to do the Exercise Blue Ham event, and tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, it started about 5 years ago or so. It involved very few stations initially. It was once a year, and it was only for one day of the weekend, I think just the Saturday. In the years since then, it involves many more stations. It happens, I think, twice a year now, and possibly 3 times on 1 year recently. And it covers both day of the weekends. So Exercise Blue Ham takes place on the 5 megahertz 60 meter band. So if you want to take part and transmit, then in the UK you do have to be a full license holder. However, if you are a foundation licensee, an intermediate licensee, or even just a shortwave listener, well, I say just, I'm one of those as well, a shortwave listener, then I would recommend listening to this because it's something slightly unusual and a bit different if you're used to just listening to ordinary quote unquote amateur radio transmissions. And if you have a dipole for the 40 meter band like I do, you can get some bits of wire, cut them to the appropriate length and clip them on the ends to turn your dipole into a 60 meter dipole, especially for the weekend. So Alpha Charlie, I think originally, if not still, stands for Air Cadets, because it is mainly the Air Cadets that run this event. And the idea of the exercise is for young people primarily who are involved with the Air Cadets to go on the air and exchange information with other Air Cadet stations, obviously, but also with amateur radio operators. Now, in the UK, 60 metres is different to all the other bands because it's the only band where amateur stations may legally make contact with non-amateur stations, and the Ministry of Defence is the primary user of that band anyway. So it's not a contest either, but having said that, if you go onto the Alpha Charlie website, they have a near real-time map of who is on what frequency and where they've managed to contact. And as the weekend wears on, you get more and more little pins stuck into this map. So if you wish to take part, you tune around on the UK authorised 60 meter amateur frequencies, and you won't hear these stations calling CQ. They don't say CQ, they say Alpha Charlie. So they'll say that 3 times, then give their call sign, which almost always will be Mike Romeo Echo, followed by 2 digits between 00 up to 99. Very, very occasionally the call sign will be slightly different. I think I've worked a couple that started Mike Romeo Alpha, but almost exclusively it will be Mike Romeo Echo and then 2 digits afterwards. So you reply to them, and if they hear you, they will acknowledge you, obviously. They don't use the signal reporting system that we do. So if you say you're 5 and 9, you might confuse a young person on the other end. The reports they give are self-explanatory, really. They use words like good, moderate, weak, readable, unreadable, distorted, fading, words like that are clearly very self-explanatory. And the QSOs do tend to be very short and to the point. So if you are interested in becoming an operator or honing your skills for passing that kind of traffic in an emergency, for example, then you could do a lot worse than listening to this exercise. So, a couple of points. Number one, in theory, these stations can call anywhere around the 5 megahertz area. You must, as a license condition, only go back to them if they are calling on a frequency that falls within the UK band plan. You may very well hear 2 Mike Romeo Echo stations working each other on pretty much any frequency around 5 megs, but you can only go back to them if they are on frequencies that are authorised in the UK. So make sure you've got a copy of the UK band plan at your side when you do this. Number 2, please use proper radio procedure and the proper phonetic alphabet. Alpha Bravo Charlie, they will understand. Abel, Baker, Chameleon or something like that, they probably won't. Thirdly, as I say, it's short and to the point, so it's not the time to go into a long, detailed 20-minute over about medical conditions or anything that's likely to be not directly relevant to a young teenager taking part in a military exercise on 60 metres. And last but not least, be patient, and whatever they do or say, roll with it. I overheard a very unfortunate incident a couple of years back where a UK station and a full licence holder, be it noted, I'm not saying this to bash foundation or intermediate licence holders, a full licence holder almost got into an argument with a young person, and then after that the person operating the station, the officer, the commander, over what information that station was or wasn't at liberty to give. So if you work one of these stations and you ask them a question, even if you know that the rules say that they are allowed to tell you, I don't know, their Maidenhead locator or whatever it is, even if you know they are, and even if you know you're right, if you ask them the question and they turn around and say, we're not allowed to tell you that, then just accept it graciously and do not argue or dispute it. Just say thank you very much and move on to the next one, because at the end of the day, we are potentially selling amateur radio to young people here and people who are in the Air Cadets who may wish to become radio amateurs. So please, please, please do not do or say anything that could risk bringing amateur radio into disrepute, or at the very least giving a bad impression of the hobby to these potential future recruits. So I encourage everybody to take part or listen if your license doesn't allow you to take part, and it can be very good fun watching the contacts roll in and the little pins going on the map on the Alpha Charlie website. And if we're lucky, propagation will be good, because you can quite often get inter-G contacts on 60 metres when they're not possible on 80 metres or 40 metres. But even 60 metres can be struck with deep and rapid QSB sometimes. So that's another reason for keeping the overs short, which ironically is exactly what I haven't done with this monster monologue. So thank you for listening to it. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, okay. I think you covered 90% of this. I hope the guys have got some other comments. I'm going to pass it to Ruth next. Ruth, you know, this is a UK thing. However, 60 metres, propagation's starting to get a bit better, and you guys have slightly different frequencies on the 60 metre band than we do over here, so you might work some we can't. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to have to check this out. It reminds me somewhat of the Armed Force Crossband Military Amateur Radio Day that we have over here, but sounds really cool. And yeah, I haven't done much with 60 meters, so this may give me a good push to see what I can hear. I think it's really cool that they have the near real-time maps, so you can actually see who's on and see that map expand, which is pretty awesome.
Dan, you don't you don't have this, but do you think there's any chances you'll get across the pond on 60 metres?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a 60-meter antenna, but I might try and listen. But, you know, as Ruth says, we do have a similar kind of thing here in the U.S. It's called the Armed Forces Communications Day Test. And I've actually participated in that. It works a little bit differently. The military stations operate just outside the ham bands. And so U.S. amateurs listen to them outside the ham bands, and then they listen within the ham bands for the amateur stations. And I did this once from the club station at the Science Museum, and it was a blast. It was a lot of fun, just something different to do, and a good test. So we were able to test that we can communicate with the military stations if need be.
Which is always good. Something new is always a bit of fun, isn't it?
Right.
Ed, I know that I know that you'll be involved with what I'm going to talk about later, the ICQ event on that day, and I may actually be involved with Jota, who's looking that way at the moment. But what do you think about this, Blue Ham?
Well, I'd just like to jump in and thank Edmund for this week's feature on the Blue Ham project. I don't think there's anything we can add to all of the very good advice he's given there, that if somebody is taking part in this, be polite, be patient. I did hear on one of the other podcasts that covered this that they are also hoping for people to call in from Europe. So that presumably means that there will be some stations in the the ITU 60-meter band, the very small 15 kilohertz that we have. And yeah, I can't say that I'll be involved listening there because I have other things to do on that day. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good thing. And, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to put 60 metres up at the Scout Hall, or whether it would be ideal to try and get some of the scouts to talk to the air cadets. Although I think one of the scout leaders is involved with the air cadets, so I never know what might be happening. Hi. But yeah, it's a good one. And I always think that these type of special events are certainly worth promoting. Right, let's find out what you guys have been up to since we last spoke. Ed, what have you been up to?
A few bits and pieces. Behind the scenes with Frank, we've been finishing off the POC, the Portable Operations Challenge, and the results are going to be available this weekend for that. So that's one thing that's completed for this year. And of course, I've been out doing SOTA activations, testing new antennas, and generally getting used to actually the new radio, the G90. I've had it a while now, but it's now got to a stage of being the standard radio for me when I go portable. And it is working extremely well. So fingers crossed it keeps doing that. And I team that up either with a linked dipole or the HF Pro 2 vertical. And I'm getting a lot of very good reports around Europe, and indeed this week on Monday or Tuesday? Monday, into Australia as well from a SOTA summit. I worked 2 stations in Australia just with 20 watts and a dipole. So HF conditions are definitely getting better. Solar Cycle 25 is waking up. So we can all enjoy that over the next few years. Apart from that, I'm trying to get working with the satellites. I know we've set a target that at some point we'll get the ICQ podcast presenters talking to each other via a satellite. And at the moment, I'm trying to work out which satellites come overhead here and at what time, and trying to get some practice through them. So that's another little project. Apart from that, just carrying on with the radio as always. So back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you've been busy, Ed, and always a lot going on. Edmund, what have you been up to?
Not very much recently. Towards the end of September, I went on holiday, stayed in Nottingham, and one day midweek travelled up to high ground in the Peak District. So thank you to the 20 or so stations that I worked on 2 meters and 4 meters FM, in case any of those people are listening to this podcast. Other than that, all I seem to have been doing recently is writing QSL cards. Had a load delivered via Amberley Museum, so I've got through several pens and spilt quite a lot of ink, but the bad news is, despite writing out all these QSL card replies, my handwriting is still as bad as it ever was, Martin.
Well, never mind. At least they'll get a QSL card and they'll be very happy about it. But I did get told by a guy I used to work with who said, "Hey, you should go to Amberley Museum. You'd be great down there." I said, "I know Edmund down there. He holds the amateur radio license for the museum. Yeah, if I was closer, I would certainly take up the offer. But too far away, Edmund." Right. Dan, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, as Ed says, the bands are really picking up. I've been working quite a bit of DX here, mostly European stations, but that's a real nice sign. My latest project is I've been such a big user of the reverse beacon network, which, as you may know, spots people, and mostly operating CW, but other modes as well. And you can see these spots on their website. So, I can use it and find out where my signal's going whenever I call CQ. So I said, well, it's time I paid back, and I thought I'd get everything set up and start reporting spots from here to reverse beacon network. Well, this has turned out to be a bigger job than I thought. The reverse beacon network uses CW skimmer, right? So I downloaded CW skimmer, got that talking to the Flex radio. So that part worked fine. Then you have to download this program called the aggregator. This is what does the work between CW skimmer and reverse beacon network. Well, the aggravator is I say aggravator because that's what it's doing. It's aggravating me. The aggregator is talking to CW skimmer, and I'm getting the spots from CW skimmer into the aggregator, but the aggregator doesn't want to talk to the reverse beacon network. And, that's a Windows thing. People have been telling me, oh, you need to make sure that the application can talk through the firewall. And there was some other advice I got. None of it has worked yet. So that's where I'm at right now with that. But hopefully I'll be on the reverse beacon network here before long.
Oh, that's good. That's good. The problem is, Dan, computers are now so complicated, and with operating systems and programs, I mean, there's thousands of files on your hard drive. I mean, in the early days, there were about half a dozen files you needed to boot your computer up. And in the days of the DOS-based applications, your word processor was a program. It might have had a configuration file, and then any files you created were the work files. But effectively, it was only the original word processors only had about 2 files you had to worry about: the configuration for the word processor and the actual executable. Now, it's phenomenal in size, and you just got to get one of these that doesn't marry up, one DLL that's from somebody else you might have on your machine, that another person will have the same DLL, and unfortunately it's been supplied by another party and it ain't tuned for what you're trying to do. And that, I think, is a lot of the problem we end up with, Dan.
Well, yeah, and besides, we're trying to do some sophisticated things here, right? We're trying to get a software-defined radio to send. I think it sends an IQ stream over to CW skimmer, which then turns around and decodes that and sends it to this aggregator program, which then has to make the network connection. So, it's one thing after another. And yeah, I understand the problem, but I wish it would just work a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but then sometimes the frustration is in the learning of why it didn't work. And then when you actually get it to work, God, do you feel good?
Well, I hope I feel good sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, Ruth, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
Well, it's definitely been a little bit since I've been here. I've been busy with classes. The biggest news for me, sort of non-amateur radio related, was I graduated from Kettering University this June with my double major in engineering physics and mechanical engineering. Culmination of a lot of work, but it was amazing. Ham radio wise, I was involved with the Yoda Region 2 summer camp back in July. It was incredible getting to be at the camp and be an attendee and learn from a lot of other young people that were there, as well as organize and give the satellite workshops for a camp and be heavily involved in an amateur radio on the International Space Station contact and getting to talk with an astronaut on the ISS during camp. So it was an incredible week. That was kind of the biggest thing I've been up to recently, just kind of still coming down from the high of that and working through some articles I did a joint article for QST for this month, and working on some others. So that was the biggest thing, and then just kind of enjoying being home now after graduating and seeing what else I want to do and play around in the hobby while I have a little more time.
Well, that's great, and we're glad to have you back on board. As I've always said, your education was more important than the podcast, and we know you haven't been able to make it a few times, but the results then turned out right, which was good.
Yes.
I just hope that when you find an employer, the employer may let you have time to record these during the day, and hopefully they'll see the benefit of publicising and working with you on other things and the knowledge you get from the hobby. So
I hope so. I hope so.
Right. Well, what have I been up to? Well, I've been doing a lot of work on the digital project, the ICQ's podcast digital project. We're bringing online a couple of new servers, which, in fairness, I'm hoping that nobody's going to spot the difference. It'll just happen overnight, or it'll happen in parallel, and we'll switch from one to the other, and there shouldn't be any downtime. That's the plan. That's what we're planning to happen. Most of you guys will probably notice no difference at all. I repaired a little whip antenna I had it on top of the car and went to SSB field day. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, the antenna's wobbling around at the top. And this antenna, a little shortened 2m77s that lives on the tailgate of the car, it just snapped. There was a plastic bit, and the plastic bit had snapped. So I hadn't hit any trees. I just think the UV got it and something happened to it. So I ended up epoxy gluing it back together because electrically it was okay. And it's back on the car, so that's another one done. I've had to take most of my antennas down because at this point in time I've just had our kitchen flat roof recovered. So starting tomorrow, the antennas start going back up again and the cables go back up on the roof and all those sort of things. So that will be good. On the DMR digital group, the ICQ Podcast digital group, did publish up on the website. Increase over last month. We've had an increase of 21 new IDs have shown up on the group. Had a total number of connections of just over 2,369 connections to the group, and one new country. At the time I did the stats, I now know I've seen at least 2 more countries come up, so the country list is growing. When I published the stats, we were at 33. So the country list is going up all the time of people who have used it, and it's available on our website. So there's that one done. Did attend the Sutton and Cheam Amateur Radio Society's AGM the other week, and yes, I got re-voted back as chairman, so for another term. But I have said this time, this is my last term. I feel it is right that somebody else should pick up these roles. It shouldn't be a dead man's shoes job, and I'm willing to help every which way I can. I did also try out the WiresX personal mode. If you want to go onto WiresX and you haven't got a repeater in your area, the Yaesu used to allow you with a HRI 200 to connect your radio via HRI 200 and the WiresX software. They then brought out a firmware upgrade some years ago, and I never did it, but over the last couple of days, I just had a try. I connected my FTM 100D up to a computer directly, bypassing the need for the HRI 200, and it works. I'm not totally convinced it's something I'll do for very long, but it was worth having a look at. And last but not least, the 16th of this month at 8 o'clock at night, we're going to have a group meeting on the ICQ Podcast Talk Group. And details are up on the website. Yes, Ed, there is a hub announcement page there now. And how to connect and all those bits and pieces is also up on the group under the digital section. So love to talk to as many of you as possible. And bearing in mind, it's not about us talking to you. It's a group discussion. If you got something you want to tell us, we're more than willing to listen. And we'd love you to tell the rest of the group what you've been up to. Because quite honestly, we're as interested in what you're doing as you may be what we're doing, because we're all amateurs. So that's what I've been up to. And as I say, trying to get as much done as I can. Right, all's left for me to do now is to wish all the guys 73s, and then we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. So I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU for joining us.
Well, you're very welcome, Martin. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and we always enjoy your company as well. Mr. Edmund Spicer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Martin.
That's great. Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, I'll echo what Dan says. Always a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, well, I think we enjoy ourselves, and that's what the 16th should be about, is, just having a light-hearted chat. Unfortunately, Ruth had to leave us a few seconds ago, but thanks, Ruth, for joining us tonight. Ruth Willet, KM4LAO. So all that's left to do is say 73 to you guys. 73.
7-3, Martin.
73.
7-3.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BLY. Just a couple of news stories for you this episode. In the UK, the RSGB have a new online booking system for individuals and clubs to book their exams. They basically say on the first page, you choose whether you're an individual who wants to book a remote exam or a club that wants to book an exam for candidates at the club premises. And then basically follow them through the series of links and either book a date and a time when they receive the link, or the candidates pay for their own exams online. So there's a link on the ICQ podcast website of where now, if you're in the UK, you can, as a club or as an individual, book your RSGB exam to get your ticket or upgrade your ticket to the next level. So check that out for now. Now, you've probably been aware that our ICQ podcast colleagues, Frank, Bill and Ed, have been involved in the Portable Operations Challenge, and it took place over the weekend of the 4th and 5th of September. And obviously all the stats and the number crunching has been done by the team now, and they've announced that Jack Hafner, November Golf to Echo, took the grand prize and first place with a total of 615,924 points. Now, the Portable Operations Challenge is a unique contest where it's all about how far and how many contacts you can make with the lowest amount of power, and it's all about, some maths that even up the balance between the big stations and the small stations. So in Jack's case, he made 6 contacts from around the US. And one, outside. He used the Hogback Mountain SOTA Summit in Virginia to connect onto a French SOTA chaser in the French-Spanish border region. So he took part in the contest, and he was only running 1 watt. So very impressive, to make those contacts from there. So fantastic job for him now. So lots of people took part in the challenge. Racking up points along the way. So it's a great opportunity to get people into contesting that maybe don't have the biggest rigs in the world, and feel like that it's not a fair contest, etc. Anyone can take part on this, and it's all about your skills as an operator and your skill and your rigs, etc. and what you can do from there. So fantastic to hear that Jack took the overall grand prize. But certainly watch out for this event to come around again next September, and start refining that low-powered rig to score massive points in next year's Portable Operations Challenge. So you can find out more about the event at foxmikehotel.com/challenge, and all the information will be there on this year's results. Right, now we head over to our features episode, and our features episode is High Power Battery Box. So as always, guys, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature I wanted to talk about a high power battery box. Now, I'm sure most of you already got battery boxes. This is for going out portable. I have my QRP one, which works very, very well, and I built it years ago. The reason I decided to go with a high power box was I brought one of my HF rigs back from Ireland the other day and thought, do you know what, I'm going to actually use it. So decided that I might not be only QRP on HF when I go out. So a new battery box came to mind, and fortunately I had a large number of the parts readily available at home. So my one didn't cost an absolute fortune. Come on to that in a second. Now, for those of you in the States, 90% of your cars are automatic, and I used to drive it automatic, and Mrs. B's is an automatic. So if you run the battery down, your main car battery down, you are unable to start it without a jump start. For those of you who drive a manual, or what is known as a stick shift in the States, you can bump start them, but it's a lot of work, especially if it's on flat ground. Pushing down the hill's not too bad. So the sensible thing is to make sure you have a decent battery to go out and operate portable. Now, then comes the option of, do you make it or do you buy it? The two options, and some of you will be much, much better at making things. Others will be saying, no, I haven't got time, just going to buy one. Well, that's understandable. And even if you just buy one, or you already have a battery box, some of the options that are available now may be able to be retrofitted into your current device, because things have moved on over the years. So, make or buy? Well, when I went on a famous auction site and started looking at battery boxes, I almost fell out of my chair. Yeah, there's some very pretty ones. Yes, they've got lots of functionality with metering and different sockets and one thing and another. Great. But I looked at the price and thought, you're having a laugh. For that sort of money, I want it gold-plated. Hi, I'm an amateur after all. Okay. But if you decide to make one yourself, there are a number of boxes available, and if you make it yourself, there's a certain amount of enjoyment and pleasure that you can look back and say, I actually did that. Now, you can, if you're good at woodwork, I'm sure that you could build a battery box out of wood. And I've thought about doing this many times. I think what I would have actually done if I had built one out of wood is I would have put a couple of steel rods or a couple of rods across the bottom, so that holding the two ends together, just to support the weight of the battery. But that's my thoughts, and you could also add all sorts of extra functionality into the box if you build it yourself, i.e. a compartment for leads or charger or whatever you want to do. The top section where everybody puts the binding posts and other such items, obviously you can do that, no problems at all, and I'll come on to that in a minute. If you decide you're going to buy a box, well, there's two different options here. You can either buy a specific battery box which is designed to do the job, or think about it, you might be into military radio. Well, if you built your battery box into, say, an ammo box or something like that, it would actually look part of your station and give it a far more interesting look if you're out portable and somebody turns up. So think about it. There are lots of things you could use. As I say, ammo boxes are one. If you was going to build a battery box and you weren't going to use quite such a large battery, some of these plastic toolboxes you can buy. You know, you could put a battery in that and drill holes in the top, fit your connectors and all those sort of things, and then clip it down. So there are various options you can make them. And if you're extremely good, you can make them out of metal, which I'm not very good at. Although I don't favour that option, apart from the ammo tin option, obviously. Anyway, various boxes you could potentially use. Now, don't forget, if you've got an HF rig, you'll be drawing up to 25 amps out this thing. So the battery's got to be able to handle that. And also, that means that you could have quite large batteries. Now, your box has got to accommodate that and all the other bits and pieces you want to put into it. If you're a smaller battery, you can get away, obviously, with a smaller box. But the wiring is the thing I must come on to. A 25 amp cable, you really need cable at least at 25 amps to go from the battery to the binding posts or the main output. Some of you may use different connectors than binding posts. That's fine and not a problem. Powerpole connectors, I've seen those at higher rating as well, and some people use those. At this point in time, whatever connection fits your operation. However, what I did with my one is, obviously I fused the two binding posts I had. So I've put two red and black binding posts in on mine. One is rated for 25 amps and one's rated for 15 amps. Now, the reason for that is I might want to run two high-powered devices for a short period of time off this battery. If I'm only going to run, say, a low power or lower power radio, the 15 amp supply will be perfectly okay. And it's fused at 15 amps. I've used car type fuses because they're cheap and easy to replace in the field. I also realised that if I run two separate supplies from the battery to two separate binding posts, then I have the option, if I blow the fuse on one and I need to be quick, I could switch to the other one. Now, if I'm switching to the lower supply, current supply, then obviously I need to turn the power down on the radio so I don't blow that one straight away. Hi. But that's why I went for two separately fused supplies to my binding posts. Now, to make things nice and bearing in mind, we don't always go out and operate on our own. So, whatever you want to put in your panel, that distribution panel on top of the box, makes life a hell of a lot easier. Now, I would suggest almost definitely you need a meter of some description. Analog or digital, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be an expensive one. And there are lots of digital ones on our favourite internet sites, auction site. So a digital voltmeter would be nice. My QRP box has got an analog meter. But you don't want it on all the time. So, you don't want it on all the time. It's in storage and everything or something. So you need to put a switch in series with it and only switch it on when you need to. That could be a push button or it could be a permanent latch switch. It depends on what you decide you want to do. Obviously, fuses, make sure you got some spare fuses with you if you're going out, because you don't want to get caught out with a blown fuse because you've just done something a little bit silly and that'll ruin your whole day because you popped a fuse. Make sure that whatever sockets you fit are going to fit the devices you run on your radio. So for argument's sake, if you're going to run Powerpole, make sure you got Powerpole connectors. I use the binding post, the banana type binding post. That's just how I like all my power distribution set up, that way. However, on our favourite internet auction site, there are lots of devices that have suddenly become available. Little multimeters, little voltmeter things that actually are a little bigger than a cigar lighter socket that you can fit that will give you the voltage. There's also connectors like that, made like that, which actually have Powerpole connectors in them. So you can wire your Powerpole connector into the little device that is about the size of a cigar lighter. So you just drill a round hole in the top of your box, push them in, tighten them up, and away you go. Wire them up as normal. Now, the one that probably is going to get you the most favour from the rest of the family, if you've got any of them with you, and it's still very, very useful to yourself. Don't forget to put a USB charge point on the battery box. If you're out with the family and they've run their phone out, they're going to be upset. Equally, if you're out somewhere a bit remote, and sometimes they are, you might want to use your mobile phone. So, and if you forgot to charge it, you're not looking stupid, are you? So, nicely to have that. And the USB 2-amp USB charge sockets, about the size of a cigar lighter, once again, is only about £2 or £3. I mean, all these little devices like the little meters, the switches, the USB ports, they're all pennies. And you get what you want. If you want 6 USB charging points, you put 6 in. If you want a digital meter or an analog meter, you fit that. By making it yourself, you actually get the fun of making them, and you make what you want, which fits your mode and your lifestyle, and long term, it's going to give you a big smile on your face. So, okay, I could have gone out and bought one. I was very lucky in my point in that I had a plastic battery box, which has sat in my shed for some time. I recovered it from a scrap pile at a company, and I also had a 130 amp leisure battery, which, thank you very much, has been kept on charge and is in good condition. So my battery box cost me very little. But the thing with amateur radio is a lot of this stuff is either going to cost you a real fortune or very little if you can scrounge or find some of the bits. I think the option is making it yourself. You're going to get what you want, not what the manufacturer wants to sell you. Although, if you haven't got the time or the skill to do it, one of these battery boxes that are available could very much solve your problems. And I was looking at battery boxes before I built this one, and they were looking at anything up to £150, which is probably nearly $200, and then you got to put the battery in it. So, yeah, not cheap if compared with what you can actually make and get yourself something you want. I hope this was of interest.
The ICQ podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, everybody, I hope you got something there from our feature there on the high power battery box. As always, always good to do a bit of building and home brewing, etc. So, really hope that you got something there from that feature. Now, it's always great to hear from you in some of the stuff we cover on the show. So, we'd like to thank Greg Dulcus, Golf Oscar 6 Tango Hotel. And he sent us in a message in relation to one of the news stories we covered recently. He said it's a good discussion about the effect of satellites on nighttime stargazing. Interesting if it's not really that big a problem. When you think about it, astronomy and ham radio are really the same hobby. It's all about signals and noise. We're just on different bands and use different equipment. Satellites are essentially the impulse noise and noise blankers, and other DSP-like software is really good at removing them, and here's why. Most deep sky astrophotography, God, there's one to get your tongue twisted around, is done by taking dozens of images of the same part of the sky, then using software to stack the sub-images layers together. In addition, most of it takes place late at night when all the satellites are already in the Earth's shadow, where they are completely invisible. Even when it's still light up there in the evening, modern processing software is really good at recognizing the bright line of pixels among a stack of several dozen images as an anomaly and quickly dispatching it. I regularly image in the evening, and it's the exception to not have at least one satellite trail passing through an image. The only issue I have is when a jumbo jet passes through the field of view. And I'm sure you probably found that those jumbo jets are coming more regularly now. I'm sure they're up in the sky more often and people are travelling more over than they have in the last few months. Overall, light pollution is a problem, especially from the new full spectrum LED lights. All those street lights raise the noise floor in the sky. Just as with radio, it becomes increasingly hard to separate signal from noise as the noise floor rises. And just as with the radio, you can't use a notch filter to remove the broadband noise sources. The old sodium and mercury vapor lamps have very distinct spectra, and one can use optical notch filters to very effectively clean up those, so not so the LEDs. That is where we need regulation to limit the effect. Keep up the great work on the show, Greg Kilo 6 Tango Hotel. So fantastic feedback from Greg Dad, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate what seems to be Greg's fantastic knowledge in that sphere of astrophotography and the satellites.
Certainly is, Colin, and thanks, Greg, for giving us some education. And this hobby is all about sharing, and Greg obviously knows far more about astro photography and looking at the sky than I do, which is good. So I've learned something, and that's the beauty of this hobby. We do share, Colin.
Couldn't agree with you more. As you say, it's great there for Greg to pass on his wonderful knowledge there, and there's certainly stuff there that certainly is very interesting. I know a while back I tried to get into astrophotography. Very, very tricky. Very, very tricky thing to do. So I doff my cap to you, and certainly give you the respect you deserve for knowing what you know there. Right, well, Dad, we've got ICQ Hub coming up next weekend on the DMR Talk Group, and I'm sure the numbers continue to grow on people using the Talk Group.
Certainly do, Colin, and like the first of every month or round about then, I take the figures at the first of the month. They might not make it to the website for a day or two after. But last month we had an increase of 2,369 connections, 21 new IDs were spotted, and 1 new country. Now, I can tell you already there were 2 more countries joined fairly soon after the first of the month. So we're sitting at 33 countries on the stats on the website, but I'm expecting, well, I know at least 35 have now. So that's it's growing. And with the advent of what we're trying to do with the digital hub, where we all get together and have a natter, I'm hoping that the talk group will get used even more. A lot of people have been talking about the fact that we seem to have our own little radio club with the presenters, but we're not excluding other people. We're more than willing to bring you in, and as I say, we're as interested in what you're doing as you may be what we're doing. So, the hobby is all about sharing, and I hope that the first one's a success. I have planned to do more throughout the year or over the years if it all works out, and we will change the time zones for people that are in different parts of the world as well. So this is the first one. Let's see how it goes. But I hope to be speaking to a lot of you on the 16th at 1900 UTC. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, exactly. I can only echo that. I think we get more out of actually what you guys are doing, and I think you guys get from what we're doing. So would love to talk to as many as you can, as I say, on that hub weekend. So I look forward to chatting away with you guys then. Right, well, I think that just about wraps up everything from Aaron. We've got some thank yous to do, obviously, as always. We'd like to thank the guys who took part in the news roundtable. So we'd like to thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Ed, DD5, Lima Papa, and Ruth, Kilo Mike 4, Lima Alpha Oscar for taking part in the news roundtables. Thank you very much there. We'd also like to thank our monthly subscription donors for helping us pay our way and get into paying for this release of the show and paying our bills on the internet. And if you found value from today's show, we'd like you to consider supporting us by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate, where they think of what you got from the show, turn that into a financial figure and pop it along our way, and say that will help us pay our bills, and that'd be all greatly appreciated. So thank you again for the monthly subscription donors for helping out along our way. Right, well, good news is we're wrapping up this show, episode number 361 now, and we're giving you enough time, wrapping up a little bit earlier than normal, to make a special cup of tea for Mrs. B. And who knows, maybe there's more of a treat than a chocolate biscuit coming her way today.
May very well be, but no, Mrs. B and me are going to be together a fair bit over the next couple of days, which is good. I'm going to make her a cup of tea and at least find her a chocolate biscuit and maybe take her out. How about that, Colin? Anyway.
Now, that does sound pleasant. Well, look, we're going to bid you all guys 73s and say those who join us on the hub next weekend, we look forward to talking to you then. And in the meantime, we'll work away and produce another show for you in a fortnight's time. So 73s all.
Yeah, 73.